Cowboy Ethics, What Wall Street Can Learn from the Code of the West. Author, James P. Owen. Photographer, David R. Stokeling. Collaborating writer, Bridget LeBlanc. Art director, designer, Nita Alvarez. Editor, Carrie Littner. Read by Katie Klamm. This book is dedicated to the memory of my father, Dr. James F. Owen. In the years since he passed away, I've often wondered what I would say to my father if I somehow had the chance to see him once more. Because of this project, I know what I would say. Dad, you were always my hero. Author's note: why this book? After 35 years in the investment management industry, I can tell you that it runs on brains, nerve, and ambition. This business doesn't often give you the chance to do something from the heart, but I'm taking that chance now, because the subject of our industry's ethics and values has become my consuming passion. Not so many years ago, the denizens of Wall Street inspired awe and envy. We were masters of the universe and had the numbers to prove it. But after a wave of scandals exposed a dark side of the industry, I found myself mourning what had been lost. I could only wonder, how did we get to this sorry state? When did we stop caring about our principles and the well-being of our clients? And most importantly, how could we begin to redeem ourselves and earn back the trust of investors and regulators? Our malady was so deep-rooted that I could see no cure. A little more than a year ago, almost by accident, my troubled musings on the state of our industry came together with my lifelong interest of the Old West and the era of the open range. Suddenly, I found my source of inspiration, the real-life working cowboy. I spent the next year exploring the life and code of the working cowboy and distilling the principles of what I call cowboy ethics. Spreading this word has now become my calling. In fact, I see it as the culmination of my career. I feel as though everything I have ever done has led me to this point. While I'm still an active partner in my firm, a hedge fund of funds advisor based in Austin, Texas, my career emphasis has shifted. Now, when I think about how I would like to be remembered, it's not as the guy who lived in a beautiful house or brought in a lot of business or helped to build investment firms, though I have done all those things. I would rather be known as the guy who was not embarrassed or afraid to speak up about issues that matter a great deal. I have come to realize that anybody can make money. It is much harder to make a difference. That is what I hope Cowboy Ethics will do. By no means is Cowboy Ethics the last word on Wall Street ethics, but I'm not that naive. But I am optimistic. I believe Cowboy Ethics can be a profound source of inspiration for meaningful change that starts with individuals, percolates through firms and organizations, and could ultimately help transform the industry at large. Wall Street desperately needs a way out of this morass. Cowboy Ethics is a place we can start. James P. Owen, Santa Barbara, California. Forward. People often ask me what it is about cowboys that makes them so different from the rest of us. They want to know why the West and cowboys stand out as symbols of American culture and values. In my mind, it's because cowboys live by the code of the West, a code of honor and truthfulness. They live in a world where a man's word is his bond and a handshake is enough to seal any agreement. The West is a place where the fence is always tight, but the gate is always open to friends and neighbors. It is a place where a man can make tough decisions without looking over his shoulder or worrying what someone else will think. A cowboy gets his strength from knowing what is right and what is wrong and being true to his beliefs. This is the essence of the Code of the West and the true cowboy way. I am proud to be a part of the culture of the West and feel lucky to be able to live in such a beautiful environment. I love riding horses and pushing cattle under the western skies. I work side by side with men who live and breathe the Code of the West and who share an undying love of the land. For them, cowboying is not just a job, but a way of life. For the past 20 years, I have dedicated my life to photographing cowboys and cowgirls as they work and play throughout the West. It has been my goal to preserve the West on film and present these images to the world through the pages of my books and calendars. I am honored to have my work published in this volume, Cowboy Ethics, because the Western images tie in so perfectly with the text. You might not think that the West and Wall Street go together, but in many ways they do. Like cowboys, the men and women of Wall Street are risk takers, yet they are also accountable for the results they deliver. Like investment professionals who must constantly make high-stakes decisions, a cowboy lays it all on the line every day. He knows that at any time, his horse can step in a hole and fall and kill him, or his cattle can get caught in a snowstorm and freeze to death. A true cowboy is someone others can count upon in any situation, no matter how rocky. In the same way, investors must know that they can trust their advisors to do right by them through good times and bad. People on Wall Street and cowboys share a can-do spirit and an ever-present sense of optimism. They also share a tradition of hard work, resourcefulness, and perseverance. Jim Owen has done a wonderful job of tying these themes together. His vision for preserving a code of ethics on Wall Street and my vision for preserving the spirit of the West are very closely related. I hope you enjoyed this volume and find it informative and inspiring. David R. Stokeling, Ketchum, Idaho. A personal journey. Have you ever had a movie change your life? Do you believe that it can even happen? Well, it happened to me. Last year, I saw the movie Open Range, and somehow it struck a deep chord in me and got me started down a whole new path in my career. It was not just the spectacular scenery or the classic showdown between the good guys and the bad guys. It had more to do with the characters played by Robert Duvall and Kevin Costner, two cowboys who lived in a grueling life in the saddle, yet cared about loyalty and honor above all. It may sound hokey, but the movie took me back to my childhood, a time when every boy imagined being the Lone Ranger or Hopalong Cassidy, galloping over the range and rescuing the schoolmarm or the stagecoach driver from peril. I did not grow up out west, but in Lexington, Kentucky. Still, as I devoured novels by Louis L'Amour and sat watching cowboy heroics on the Saturday matinees, the cattle herds and the big sky country never seemed far away. In fact, one of our closest family friends was A.B. Guthrie Jr., a journalist with the Lexington Leader who became one of the country's foremost Western writers. His novel, The Way West, won the 1950 Pulitzer Prize, and the screenplay he wrote for Shane, the 1953 Western classic starring Alan Ladd, won an Oscar nomination. I still remember Guthrie's characters, Boone Caudill and Lat Evans, and how much I wanted to possess their kind of quiet strength. As I read about their trials and adventures on the frontier, I longed to be like them, to be brave and cool-headed in a crisis and a true blue friend, someone who never hesitated to stand up for what is right. In short, Guthrie's stories made me want to be a better person. Seeing Open Range made all those feelings come flooding back. It reawakened my fascination with the West and its irresistible pull to the imagination. I started reading everything I could find on the subject and have not stopped yet. The movie also got me thinking anew about the state of our world and the financial industry in which I have worked for over 35 years. Suddenly, things seemed much clearer. Why do we need 20-page contracts when a handshake used to seal a deal? Shouldn't a man's word still be his bond? Didn't we all learn the golden rule back in kindergarten? What made us lose sight of the very things that ought to matter the most? For some time, I have been feeling deep anger and shame at what has happened in our industry. Though the number of blatant wrongdoers may be relatively few, the stain of greed, dishonesty, and impropriety has touched us all. Watching Open Range, I felt a tremendous emotional pull, a yearning to get back to simpler times when right and wrong were as clear as black and white. I am not saying that everyone on Wall Street is venal. Making money is what this business is all about, and nobody wants to change that. But it seems that somewhere along the line, our focus on competing and winning at any cost has overrun all other considerations. In my opinion, something has gone horribly wrong in our business, and our self-preservation depends on fixing it. How can we expect clients to entrust us with their hard-won assets when some of the most venerable, best-known firms in the industry have been tarnished? Wall Street has always operated with a system of self-regulation, but clearly something in that system is broken. So what is the answer? For years now, business schools have been teaching courses on ethics. In fact, if you put together all the ethical rules and guidelines adopted by our firms, associations, and regulatory agencies, you would have enough to sink a small battleship. Can we solve the problem with an even tougher, more specific set of rules that spells out every detail of the way we ought to do our business? I don't think so. I do not believe it is possible to devise a set of rules that will lift us up out of our quagmire. No one could ever write rules that anticipate and cover every situation. Rules are also difficult to enforce when the stakes are high and wrongdoers think they are smarter than the enforcers. Most importantly, rules alone do not give us a compelling reason to change our ways. To me, the fundamental problem is that we have confused rules with principles. Rules can always be bent, but principles cannot. So while bureaucratic rules may reinforce the ways we ought to behave, they are no substitute for personal principles. I believe that where human behavior is concerned, any true, lasting change has to come from within. So if we want to encourage better ethical practices throughout the industry, we need something that will touch the deepest part of us, something that will make us want to do better and be better than we are. In short, what we need is not more regulation, but more inspiration. Yet these days, inspiration is not so easy to come by. Think about it. Whom can we look up to as our heroes today? Political leaders, sports figures, corporate CEOs, even people of the church have not remained above greed, corruption, cynicism, and scandal. I feel fortunate to have rediscovered my own heroes and my own source of inspiration. In looking back to one of my earliest passions, back to the Old West, I have found a way to make more sense of the world and my place in it. I'm not talking about the Old West of Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, or Calamity Jane. Truthfully, I'm not just interested in gunslingers, Indian fighters, gold prospectors, or dance hall girls. To me, it is the working cowboys who are the true icons of the Old West. They lived the harsh life of the saddle, herding cattle for hundreds of miles across the plains, rivers, and mountains. Far away from the comforts of town and the sheriff's watchful eye, they lived by their own set of rules. Though these rules were unspoken, among many cowboys, they were known and respected everywhere on the range. Actually, these so-called rules of the range really were not rules at all. They had more to do with character, principles, and values, not as you talked about them, but as they were reflected in your actions. It did not matter whether a person was rough around the edges, or hard-looking, or had done some questionable things in the past. What mattered was the kind of person he had become, as revealed by his deeds, what kind of man he was when things got rough, or when nobody was looking. The code of the West was something he held inside and he knew in his heart when he was or was not living up to it. When you steep yourself in the history of those times and in the time-honored ways of the working cowboy, you realize there is nothing abstract about these values. Cowboys embraced them not as a matter of religious or intellectual belief, but as a matter of day-to-day survival. The work they did was rough, difficult, and dangerous. They had to be able to rely on the integrity and character of the cowhands that rode with them. Life on the open range. You cannot understand the cowboy's code without knowing something about his era and the life he led. That story begins with the land, the vast territory that was known as the Great Plains, or, as it was labeled in the early 19th century maps, the Great Desert. It was a hostile, mostly arid environment with temperatures could range from 50 below zero to 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the same spot, depending upon the season and the time of day. It is no wonder that few heading out west had any thought of settling in the continent's vast midsection. Few saw it as more than a barren wasteland they had to get across to reach what we now know today as Colorado, California, and Oregon. You look on, out into space, out almost beyond time itself. You see nothing but the rise and the swell of grass, the monotonous, endless prairie. A stranger traveling on the prairie would get his hopes up, expecting to see something different on making the next rise. To him, the disappointment and monotony were terrible. He's got loneliness, we would say of such a man. John Noble, early 20th century Western painter. But this barren land did have one thing: plenty of grass to sustain any creature tough enough to withstand the harsh environment. The special breed of cattle known as Texas Longhorns were half-wild descendants of cattle that had been ranched for 300 years in Old Mexico. They were fearsome and mean, reaching up to 1 ton in weight with wicked horns that could stretch 6 feet across. But they were perfectly adapted to survival on the open plains and thrived on the prairie grass. So much so that when the early Texas settlers arrived, they found hundreds of thousands of cattle running loose throughout the territory and there for the taking. Thus, the great ranches and cattle barons came into being. It took the railroad to turn the ranches into an industry. In Texas, cattle were so abundant that they were worth no more than $4 per head. But in the country's growing population centers, meat was a rare luxury, and that same steer might be worth $40. By 1866, the railroad had reached Missouri, and by 1869, it stretched to Kansas. Any rancher who could lead 2,000 or 3,000 cattle the several hundred miles up the railheads could make a fortune. That is how the great trail drives came about. Between 1866 and 1885, more than 8 million head of cattle were driven up the trails. At the center of it all was the cowboy. His rugged, simple way of life and the values that go with it loom large in our country's history and mythology. Yet the cowboy's heyday lasted only for a single generation. From the end of the Civil War until 1886, when overgrazing, a summer of drought, and a winter of fierce blizzards wiped out much of the industry. By 1890, barbed wire was closing off the open range, and the era of the great trail drives was over. But the cowboy's traditions and his creed have endured, in legend and in practice, right up to the present day. Working cowboys are the embodiment of the true American spirit. They live a rugged, clean life, a difficult, yet simple life. Clint Eastwood, Forward, Gathering Remnants, a tribute to the working cowboy, 2000. Living by the code. By today's standards of social and political correctness, cowboys would hardly be considered models of deportment. They routinely smoked, drank, and cursed, and their table manners were nothing to write home about. They packed guns and sometimes found it necessary to use them. They might not even draw the line at certain kinds of stealing, though it was a hanging offense to steal a man's horse because that could threaten his life. Yet a cowboy would never dream of disrespecting a lady, taking the last of the water without refilling the bucket, or failing to share his last bit of food with a hungry stranger. The rules of cowboy etiquette were detailed and arcane. To know them, you had to be intimately familiar with life on the range. They covered any number of situations. When you could begin to eat, when you could wear your hat indoors, what to do if you came across a downed fence, where to leave your gun, and when you entered someone's house. Cowboy ethics, on the other hand, were far simpler. Knowing right from wrong, following the golden rule, and being willing to work hard would take you a long way. Was there any more to it than that? Was there really such a thing as a code of the West? Having pored over stacks of books on the subject over the past year, I can tell you that yes, there really was a code that working cowboys valued and lived by. It was the product of a unique place and time. Before the American West was settled and barbed wire closed off the plains, there was no framework of law. For the cowboy, the code was the one civilizing influence that could be relied upon. The interesting thing is that no one can say with authority exactly what the Code of the West was. It was not carved in stone. In fact, it was not even written down on paper. Yet, while not every cowboy always abided by the code, every cowboy knew what it was. Based upon everything I have learned in my research, I believe I know too. What follows is my own list of the 10 principles that capture the essence of the Code of the West. They are true to the spirit of the open range, yet still have meaning for us today. Cowboy ethics number 1: live each day with courage. A man wanting in courage would be as much out of place in a cow camp as a fish on dry land. Indeed, the life he is daily compelled to lead calls for the existence of the highest degree of cool, calculating courage. Texas Livestock Journal, 1882. There's an old saying that a cowboy is a man with guts and a horse. No one lacking in bravery could last very long on the range. Trailing beeves, as the cowboys called it, was dangerous enough on a good day. Cowboys encountered stampedes, quicksand, torrential rivers, clouds of alkaline dust that burned the lungs, hostile Indians, and other life-threatening dangers. Yet cowboys cheerfully braved all these perils so they could sleep under the stars and earn 75 or 80 cents a day. Even so, their demonstration of grit earned them no special recognition or praise from the boss, or even from their fellow cowboys. The virtues of fortitude and courage were part of the cowboys' stock in trade, something to be remarked upon only in their absence. Cowards were not to be tolerated, because one coward could endanger the whole group. If you suspect that the courageous cowboy is only a Hollywood myth, read the words of John R. Erickson, a fine Western writer who has also lived the cowboy life, from his book, Some Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys, 1999. The heroism of the working cowboy isn't a joke. It isn't something that has been cooked up by an advertising agency, and it isn't something that cheap minds will ever understand. Cowboys are heroic because they exercise human courage on a daily basis. They live with danger. They take chances. They sweat. They bleed. They burn in the summer and freeze in the winter. They find out how much a mere human can do, and then they do a little more. They reach beyond themselves. This is not to say that cowboys never knew fear, only that they were able to put their fear aside when there was work to be done. There is more to courage than jumping into a river to save someone's life. It is also being willing to speak up and say that something isn't right, even if that means going up against partners, colleagues, or superiors. Cowboy ethic number 2: take pride in your work. The cowboy is often portrayed as being unlettered and unskilled, a common laborer in spurs. In the cowboy's own mind, he was no mere work hand, but a cavalier, a knight of the plains sitting tall in the saddle. The cowboy's pride grew from his riding and roping skills, his indifference to danger and deprivation, and his capacity for hard work. It is true that cowboys disdained work they could not do from horseback. They might rather ride 20 miles in a howling blizzard than dig post holes. But if there was a job that needed doing, no matter how humble, a cowboy was obliged to do it, and do it the best he could. A poem by Red Steagall, the official cowboy poet of Texas, beautifully evokes this principle. Titled "The Fence That Me and Shorty Built," it is the tale of an old cowpoke who watched a young hire shirking a mundane job he resents. The old hand remembers how years earlier he had felt the same way until Shorty, a wiser and more experienced hand, set him straight. These are the stanzas that get to the heart of it. Son, I ain't much on schoolin', didn't get too far with that. But there's a lot of learnin' hidden underneath this hat. I got it all the hard way, every bump and bruise and fall. Now, some of it was easy, but then most weren't fun at all. But one thing that I always got from every job I've done is to do the best I can each day and try to make it fun. I know that bustin' through them rocks ain't what you like to do. By getting mad, you've made it tough on me and all the crew. Now you hired on to Cowboy and you think you've got the stuff, and you told him you're a good hand, and the boss, well, he's called your bluff. So how's that gonna make you look when he comes riding through and he asks me who dug the holes and I say it was you? Now we could let it go like this and take the easy route, but doing things the easy way ain't what it's all about. The boss expects a job well done from every man he's hired. He'll let you slide by once or twice, then one day you'll get fired. If you're not proud of what you do, you won't amount to much. You'll bounce around from job to job, just slightly out of touch. Come morning, let's redig those holes and get that fence in line, and you and I will save 2 jobs, those being yours and mine. And someday you'll come riding through and look across this land and see a fence that's laid out straight and know you had a hand in something that's withstood the years, the proud and the free from guilt. You'll smile and say, boys, that's the fence that me and Shorty built. Cowboy ethic number 3, always finish what you start. No cowboy ever quit while his life was hardest and his duties were most exacting. J. Frank Dobie, a vaquero of the bush country, 1929. Cowboys hated quitters. They hated whining and complaining almost as much because those things had the stench of quitting. On a trail drive, it was when things got roughest that every hand was expected to give his all. There's a great scene in Howard Hawks' classic Western film, Red River, that perfectly captures the steeliness of cowboy resolve. John Wayne plays Thomas Dunson, who in 1851 arrives in Texas with nothing but big dreams and a quick draw. 14 years later, he has built a cattle empire, only to face financial ruin in the economic collapse of Texas following the Civil War. His only hope is to drive his cattle 1,000 miles to Missouri, where they will be worth a small fortune. Others have attempted the journey, but nobody has made it yet. Let's face it, these last few years haven't been the easiest of times, but on days when things seem especially rough, I think about what it must have been like on the open range in the middle of a blizzard, and I tell myself, cowboy up. The night before setting out, Dunson lets his cowhands know what they are up against. If the herd makes 10 miles a day, they'll be doing well, and they are sure to encounter Indians, dry wells, and foul weather, he warns. Once they get to Missouri, they will have to deal with border gangs, intent on killing as many men and stealing as many cattle as they can. Nobody has to come along, Dunson tells his men. We'll still have a job for you when we get back. Then, raising his voice, he adds, but remember this, every man who signs on for the drive agrees to finish it. There'll be no quitting along the way. Not by me, not by you. It is impossible to watch John Wayne deliver those lines and not say to yourself, if I were one of those cowboys, I would make it to Missouri or die trying. Cowboy ethic number 4, do what has to be done. Whenever there is trouble, we'll depend on ourselves. We'll take care of it when it comes, not after it's too late. Will James, The American Cowboy, 1942. The classic Western hero is the man who stands up for what is right, who rectifies injustice wherever he sees it, and exacts retribution when it is due. That is what the Code of the West demanded. To the cowboy, it was a matter of honor to do the right thing, even, and especially, when the odds were fearsomely stacked against him. Out on the range, the true test of a man's honor was how much he would risk to keep it intact. Take, for example, the movie High Noon, in which Gary Cooper, as Sheriff Will Kane, is left alone to defend the town against a murderous band of outlaws. In answer to the pleadings of his Quaker wife, Kane simply says, "I've got to." That's the whole thing. In the classic Western films such as High Noon, The Unforgiven, and more recently, Open Range, the plot goes beyond the simple clash of good and evil. Strong as the hero may be, he always faces an enemy who is equally formidable, if not more so. He faces the prospect that his stand will cost him dearly, maybe even cost him his life. And he faces the ultimate questions. What will I do in the moment of truth? Will I have the courage to stand up for what is right? In Kevin Costner's Open Range, the cowboy heroes are Boss Spearman, a tough old cattle drover who has endeavored to steer clear of bloodshed, and his hand, Charlie Waite, who has clearly done some killing in his time. While resting their herd, they run up against Baxter, a despotic rancher who rules the nearby town and hates free grazers like Boss and Charlie. Baxter's men rough up their friend Mose, and the bullying rancher lets them know he means to kill them and scatter their herd if they do not quit his domain. "You reckon them cows are worth getting killed over?" Charlie asks Boss when he vows to protect the herd. "The cows is one thing," says Boss, "but one man telling another where he can go in this country is something else." After Baxter's thugs kill Mose, leave another hand for dead, and even shoot the dog, there is no question what Boss and Charlie must do. Girded for a showdown, they find the townspeople sympathetic, but too cowed to join the fight. "I didn't raise my boys to see them killed," says one business owner. "You may not know it," Charlie replies, "but there's things that gnaw at a man worse than dying." Knowing that all hell is about to break loose, Charlie, who has faced the barrel of a gun more than once, hatches a desperate plan to take down the 8 men gunning for them. "You've got it all worked out," Boss says approvingly. "Yeah," says Charlie, "everything except the part where we don't get killed." While smoking a last Cuban cigar, they reflect on what they will miss if they do not succeed. The dream of an easier life in Boss's case, and a newfound chance at happiness with Sue Barlow in Charlie's. While we know it would not do for the bad guys to win in the end, the outcome of the gunfight really is not the point. What matters is that Boss and Charlie could have rounded up their cattle and left trouble behind, but they didn't. Cowboy ethic number 5. Be tough, but fair. I won't be wronged, I won't be insulted, and I won't be laid a hand on. I don't do these things to other people, and I require the same from them. John Wayne in his last film, The Shootist, 1976. Everyone knows that cowboys of the Old West were as tough as nails. Living in wide-open spaces far beyond the reach of authority, they had to be. They often carried guns for protection against Indians, wild beasts, and marauders. They dealt swiftly with rustlers and horse thieves, and their pride made them notably intolerant of insults to them, their outfit, or their way of life. But our popular image of the cowboy overlooks the way his toughness was tempered by other elements of his code, the ones demanding fairness in all dealings. In practice, the notion of fair play was deeply ingrained in every facet of prairie life. Cowboys on the open range felt honor-bound to give those they encountered a square deal, as Teddy Roosevelt called it, and they depended on others to treat them the same way. The code was the framework for a symbiotic social order that raised the odds of survival in a tough business and a harsh land. For example, extending open hospitality to anyone who needed it was an ironclad rule. A traveler had the right to enter any ranch house at any time of day or night, even if the occupants were away, to avail himself of food and shelter. He was even free to take those supplies required for the next leg of his journey. While he was not expected to pay for the ranch owner's hospitality, the code called for him to make his recompense to another hungry stranger somewhere down the line. There is a famous story of a greedy rancher who fed 2 cowboys who were down on their luck, but then demanded that they pay for their dinner. This breach so outraged the hands that they branded one of his calves with giant letters spelling out, "Meals, 50 cents." Along the same vein, if a cow bearing a neighbor's brand wandered into a rancher's herd, he was not expected to return the stray, as that could mean a journey of 50 miles or more. He was free to sell the animal along with his own herd, but he was also obligated to pay his neighbor the price he received for the cow, plus any calves she may have dropped. Ranchers everywhere abided by this rule, as their cattle were equally prone to wander across the unfenced range. Under the cattle country definition of fair play, a deal was a deal, a handshake was as good as a written contract, and there was no such thing as reneging on a debt. As the legendary cattleman Oliver Loving was lying on his deathbed, his mind was troubled by some debts he had incurred. His partner, Charles Goodnight, paid tribute to his friend's deep sense of honor by keeping their partnership in force until his debts could be paid in full. Cowboys of the Old West were workers, not gunslingers, and they did not go looking for trouble. But when trouble found them, the rules were unequivocal. If someone was killed in a fair fight, that was not murder, it was an incident. On the other hand, shooting an unarmed or fleeing man, even if he was a sworn enemy, was strictly forbidden, and transgressors were quickly brought to frontier justice. On the open range, cowboys shared a way of life that was as difficult and tenuous as it was rewarding. So they had a natural self-interest in honoring the code's insistence on fair play. For them, the golden rule was not something learned in Sunday school. The principle of do unto others as you would have them do unto you was nothing more and nothing less than a key to survival. If you ever find yourself questioning what's fair in any given situation, all you have to do is ask, how would I want to be treated? Cowboy ethic number 6. When you make a promise, keep it. When it came to keeping his word, a cowboy's allegiance to principle was absolute. He was bound to fulfill his promise, no matter what. This theme is vividly rendered in Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It is arguably the great American novel, and the television version starring Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones ranks as one of the best westerns ever made. As the saga of the two former Texas Rangers draws to a close, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call have driven their herd all the way to Montana, where they intend to start a ranch. Gus and his hand, P.I., are scouting for a site when they are attacked by Indians and Gus takes 2 arrows in the leg. Worse still, the Indians kill their horses. Surrounded, the two dig in for the night next to a riverbank, the only cover they can find. By morning, Gus is feverish. After all the travails he has endured, Gus's luck has run out. P.I. goes for help, losing his clothes at the first river crossing and walking naked for 3 days until he reaches the trail drive's encampment. By the time Call catches up with his partner, Gus has been rescued and one leg has been amputated, but the other leg is now gangrenous. Clearly, the end is near. Gus tells Call he wants a favor. He wants to be buried back in Texas, in an orchard where he had some happy times. Call thinks his friend is delirious. "You want me to haul you to Texas?" he exclaims. "We just got to Montana." "I got nothing against wintering in Montana," Gus replies. "Just pack me in salt or charcoal or what you will. I'll keep well enough and you can make the trip in the spring." Pointing out that Gus will never know if he keeps his promise, Call relents, saying, "I reckon I'll do it, since you've asked." Spring comes and Call gets ready to haul Gus's preserved remains back to Texas, telling his hands he'll be back in a year. From the day of Gus's death, everyone has told Call his friend was drunk or out of his mind to ask such a favor. Call agrees the whole thing is foolish, but, as he says, a promise is a promise. The 3,000-mile journey does not go smoothly, and Call makes his last leg dragging the coffin behind his horse on a makeshift travois. As he digs Gus's grave with a hand shovel, he is weak and his water has run out. The digging takes all day, and when he is done, Call feels he is about to be ready to be buried himself. "There," he mutters under his breath. "That will teach me to be more careful about what I promise." If you think about it, investors only need 2 things from Wall Street: someone they can trust, someone they can count on. Cowboy ethic number 6. When you make a promise, keep it. Cowboy ethic number 7. Ride for the brand. They were intensely loyal to the outfit they were working for and would fight to the death for it. They would follow their wagon boss through hell and never complain. Teddy Blue Abbott, We Pointed Them North, Recollections of a Cowpuncher, 1939. This is one cowboy principle that is often misunderstood. It is true that once a cowboy tossed his bedroll into an outfit's wagon, he was obliged to put its needs ahead of his own. Any personal hardships or complaints were to be swallowed the same way he swallowed his coffee. His loyalty came through in his unstinting hard work, his cheerfulness, and his fervent defense of the outfit against any harm or slur. But riding for the brand did not mean giving the boss blind, unquestioning allegiance. Cowpunchers were not cut out to toady to someone just because he counted out their pay at the end of the month. As Teddy Roosevelt observed, "Cowboys call no man master." The cowboy's greatest devotion was to his calling and his way of life, so his loyalties naturally centered upon those who valued his traditions and counted upon him to uphold them. In short, the cowboy gave allegiance and respect where they were deserved and returned. One of Red Stiegel's best-known poems eloquently speaks to these nuances. Titled Ride for the Brand, it tells of the Wagoner Ranch and a leathery, hard-bitten old cowpoke named Jake, who is schooling the new kid in the unwritten laws of the range. This passage puts the idea of loyalty to the boss in context. Son, a man's brand is his own special mark. It says, "This is mine, leave it alone." You hire out to a man. You ride for his brand and protect it like it's your own. He said, "Mr. Wagoner come out here in 1903. This country was sagebrush, mesquite trees, and sand. He carved him this ranch out of blood, sweat, and guts. So be proud that you ride for his brand." If you work in the investment industry, make no mistake about where your loyalty should lie. The client comes first. Not when it's convenient, not when you feel like it, but always. Cowboy ethic number 7, ride for the brand. Cowboy ethic number 8, talk less and say more. In the old Saturday matinees, the cowboy was always a man of few words, the strong, silent type. In real life, too, cowboys were not exactly what you would call garrulous. In the cowboy's mind, the bigger the mouth, the better it looks shut. That is why he ranked lawyers and other windbags not much higher than cattle rustlers. Who can forget the sight of Clint Eastwood spitting tobacco juice on the fast-talking peddler's white pants in The Outlaw Josie Wales? Maybe it was the isolation, or the stark contrast between flat earth and blue sky, or the grandeur of nature overwhelming the puniness of small talk. For whatever reason, cowboys avoided empty verbiage. They were doers, not talkers. And when they did talk, they got straight to the point. When a trail boss said of a cowboy, "He's a good hand," that was the highest praise he could bestow. Likewise, an admiring hand might say of his employer, "That boss, he sure can cowboy." The cowboy's preference for clipped commentary became part of his trademark, something that marked him as surely as his hat and pointed boots. But it would be a mistake to think that cowboys were inexpressive. A better description would be sentient, meaning terse or pithy in expression. Cowboys had an undeniable gift for speaking concise, often colorful, phrases and word pictures that distilled thoughts down to their essence. As cowboy chronicler Raymond F. Adams put it, they laid firm hands on language and squeezed the juice right out of it. This gift for phrase-making is one reason why a strong tradition of cowboy poetry still flourishes today. Make no mistake, cowboys' talk could be crude and laced with profanity, but even the coarsest expressions were usually delivered with a grin, and in between the cuss words and barnyard imagery, cowboys had a way of making things both simple and profound. Being mostly uneducated, cowboys were not bound by the rules of grammar or polite discourse. Their words came straight from their experience of life, which gave them a powerful originality and directness. Cowboys said what they meant. They also understood that when words were scarce, the ones you do say become all the more important. I've learned over the years that when it comes to communicating with clients, the most important rule is keep it simple, keep it true. Cowboy ethic number 9. Remember that some things aren't for sale. One of the most underrated classic Western films is Monty Walsh, the Turner Network television remake recently released on DVD. Tom Selleck was born to play the role of a turn-of-the-century Wyoming cowboy who is watching his way of life disappear. The combination of deadly winters and progress has doomed the small ranchers, and what herds remain are being taken over by large, faceless corporations. Monty is fast becoming an anachronism, and he knows it. As work and money dwindle, Monty is driven to consider the unthinkable. He resigns himself to looking for a job in town, one that might even pay enough to let him settle down and marry a local saloon girl, the one woman he is comfortable with. One day, while breaking a wild horse and nearly wrecking half the town in the process, Monty catches the eye of a proprietor of a traveling Wild West show. Envisioning Monty as his next star attraction, the showman offers him a job playing a regal cowboy for the princely sum of $15 a week, more money than he could hope to earn anywhere else. Our industry is known for being full of smart people, but think about it. How smart can we be if we don't value our reputations above all else? Monty reluctantly accepts, but the moment of truth comes when he puts on the garish fringed costume and ridiculous hat he's been given and looks in the mirror. Disgusted by what he has been reduced to, Monty rebels. "I ain't spitting on my whole life," he says, taking off the hat and handing it to the stunned promoter. With this simple gesture, Monty throws away his one chance for a new start. But for him, there really is no choice. No amount of money is enough to make him cheapen and dishonor the way of life he has chosen. The movie does not have a particularly happy ending. Monty's best friend is murdered and his would-be fiancée dies of pneumonia. We even see him stepping his horse aside from the path of a horseless carriage driven by the pompous twit who took his job away. But Monty is still in the saddle, and in the last frames of the movie, as the primitive automobile is mired in the mud, he jumps his horse right over it and rides off into the sunset. Though he cannot hold back the future, he will hold on to his dignity. Cowboy ethic number 10. Know where to draw the line. "Good fences make good neighbors," wrote the New England poet Robert Frost. But out west, people looked at things differently. On the open range, the boundaries people needed to get along were set by shared standards of right and wrong. Those boundaries were as good as fences because everyone knew where they were. Hud is a story about drawing clear lines between right and wrong in an era when that idea seemed hopelessly out of fashion. With Paul Newman in the title role, the 1963 film tells of the conflict between Homer Bannon, an elderly cattle rancher who stubbornly holds on to his principles, and his son, Hud, who cares about nothing but himself. The rancor between father and son flares up when Homer finds a heifer dead for no apparent cause. Over Hud's angry protests, Homer calls in a government vet who warns the Bannons to expect the worst. If the cow died from foot and mouth disease, as he suspects, the entire herd will have to be destroyed. Just because something isn't illegal doesn't mean it's right. To Hud, this means losing the inheritance he is counting on to support his hard-drinking, devil-may-care lifestyle. He spends far more time in his pink '57 Cadillac than tending cattle, but to Homer, it is a devastating blow. His herd is all he has to show for a lifetime of hard work. Hud offers him an easy way out. He will get on the phone and sell the cattle the next day, before the tests can confirm the disease. But Homer will not even discuss it. He would never consider passing diseased cattle on to his neighbors. When Hud suggests selling them out of the state, Homer can scarcely believe his ears. "What?" he says. "And take a chance on starting an epidemic in the entire country?" At this, Hud explodes. "This whole country is run on epidemics. Where you been?" He sneers, ticking off the litany of wrongdoings he sees all around. "Price fixing? Crooked TV shows? Income tax? Finagling? Souped-up expense accounts? How many honest men do you know?" he demands. Homer will not be swayed, though he knows his honesty carries a heavy price. He must watch as the entire herd he has painstakingly bred and crossbred is prodded into pits, shot, and buried by bulldozers. As if that were not enough, he must destroy the 2 rare Texas Longhorns he has raised himself. Among the last of their breed, they are Homer's reminder of a vanishing way of life. "Let's turn 'em loose," suggests Lon, Hud's young nephew, who wants to spare his grandfather his ultimate pain. "No, that wouldn't be the thing to do," the old man replies. "They've got to go along with the rest." Homer knows it does not require a big fall from grace for men to lose their integrity. It most often happens by degrees, as corners are cut and minor misdeeds are rationalized, each small step leading to another. And so the world changes, little by little, except for those who stay stubbornly true to their own beliefs. Knowing Lon is half repelled, half attracted by Hud's freewheeling ways, Homer tells him he must make up his own mind as to what is right and what is wrong. While history tells us the cowboy's code fit the days of the open range, Modern-day tales and films such as HUD tell us why the Code of the West is timeless. A call to action: how cowboy ethics can change our industry. I have described the Cowboy's Code as 10 timeless principles to live by because that is exactly what they are. I believe the Code can offer meaningful inspiration and guidance to anyone. The Code of the West is especially relevant to Wall Street because, like our industry, cowboys operated with a system of self-regulation. Either you lived up to the code or you were shunned. And like us, cowboys had compelling practical reasons to embrace their code. As a matter of survival, they needed to know they could depend on the integrity and character of those who rode with them. In the same way, our clients must be able to trust us to handle their assets. Our business survival depends on it. The challenge we face as an industry is figuring out how we can redeem our reputations and earn back investors' trust. One thing I know is that we cannot do it with words. No matter how eloquent or high-flown, words can only ring hollow in investors' ears. The only way we can do it is with our actions. Actions that reflect the character, principles, and values at our core. This is the take-home lesson from Cowboy Ethics. Everyone needs a code, a creed to live by. John Wayne said that, and so did William Donaldson, chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, when he spoke to the National Association of Securities Dealers in May of 2004. In essence, he told the NASD that while the SEC is vigorously pursuing enforcement actions against wrongdoers and promulgating a host of new ethical rules, the SEC cannot do the whole job alone. Quoting Donaldson, "Our rules alone won't be enough. Our rules never have been enough and are not enough today, and never will be enough. What's really needed is a change of mindset, one that fosters not only a culture of compliance, but also a company-wide environment that fosters ethical behavior and decision-making." What does a culture of compliance mean? In the SEC chairman's own words, it means instilling a company-wide commitment to do the right thing, this time and every time, so that ethical behavior becomes the core of the company's essential DNA and is shared by every employee. It means a firm's leaders should have the courage and commitment to question whether a particular practice is truly ethical or truly in the best interests of clients and customers, no matter what the lawyers say. It means that customers always come before the balance sheet and not the other way around. The SEC is doing its part by taking enforcement actions against the bad guys who compromise the integrity of our entire industry. The rest of the job is up to the 90% of us who want to do the right thing. We are the ones who need to set the tone by embracing a meaningful set of corporate values and living by them each and every day. If we fail to act, if we fail to create a culture that fosters doing the right thing, we risk losing the privilege of self-regulation. Think about it. Do we really want the lawyers to come in and run our businesses? We who count ourselves among the good guys cannot just sit by silently and let that happen. If we do, it will be our own fault as much as the fault of those who cheated, lied, and covered up. That day will soon be here if we don't act, and act now. I do not deny that instilling corporate values sounds like a mushy, amorphous task, one that could be awfully tough to get your arms around. But we can break it down into a to-do list that we can all start working on right away. As a start, here are my suggestions. First, every firm registered with the SEC should appoint a director of corporate values who is charged with overseeing ethical principles and practices concerning every activity in the firm. I am not talking about someone who is off in a corner dusting off mission statements and churning out yet another batch of compliance manuals. I am talking about a senior-level individual with the stature to represent the firm's commitment to living by a code. While the chief compliance officer's job is to meet the letter of the law, the job of the director of corporate values would be to fulfill the spirit of the law. If you are not sure whom to tap for the job, pick the person who makes everyone stand a little straighter when he or she walks into the room. Secondly, adopt a code and apply this set of principles to every decision of consequence. This code does not have to be emblazoned on a brass plate set in mahogany. What matters is that you live by the code each day. I have to admit that, at my own firm, a growing hedge fund of funds advisors named Austin Capital Management, my partners were initially skeptical about embracing the Cowboy Code, wondering if it was really more than just a gimmick. Then we began consciously to apply Cowboy ethics to our daily business practices. The results were startling. In most cases, the right thing to do was surprisingly clear. When the issue was particularly thorny, difficult, or personal, our discussions would quickly get right to the heart of the matter. What is fair? Where do we want to draw the line? What are we willing and unwilling to compromise? Putting it in those terms helped give us the courage and resolve to make difficult choices and do what had to be done. My firm has now adopted the 10 Cowboy principles as the centerpiece of our ethical code, and I urge you to do the same. Third, we can make sure that integrity and character are key factors in every hiring and partnering decision. Our industry is a magnet for amazingly bright, talented people, but we need to look beyond the SAT scores and resumes to the inner core of those we choose to work for us and for our clients. At my own firm, we see brain power and hard work as a given, the baseline requirement. As we elevate candidates, we put personal integrity and character at the top of the list. There are many other things that firms can do. Have periodic meetings where colleagues discuss ethical issues they have faced. Build ethical considerations into procedural guidelines. Have the CEO or managing partner address all employees on the importance of corporate values. Tell our clients the high expectations they should have of us and put it in writing, not in dense cover your rear and legalese, but in plain, straightforward language. We also need organizations such as the Investment Management Consultants Association to get out in front of this issue and lead at the industry level. I'm singling out IMCA not because I helped found the group, but because over its 19-year history, IMCA has demonstrated its commitment to raising the level of professionalism in the industry. But there is still work to be done, and I believe that IMCA has the potential to step up and act as the conscience of the industry. With all the talent and energy in IMCA and perhaps other organizations, we can surely find some fresh, practical ways to help investment firms create the culture of doing right. Through these industry groups, firms can also work together instead of separately reinventing the wheel. There is a time to compete and a time to cooperate, and we need to recognize that we are all in this together. I believe the only way we can truly transform our industry is from the inside out. Ultimately, that means leadership starts with the individual. We do not have to sit back and wait passively for our firms and organizations to step forward. We all have the potential to lead by example. We can each embrace our own code and reflect it in the things we do each day. And we can speak out when we see things our partners, colleagues, and firms should be doing differently. Speaking for myself, I can tell you that since starting this project, I think about things on a whole different level. I have taken the Cowboy Code to heart, and I'm making a conscious effort to live by it each day. My life has changed as a result, and I hope the difference comes through in my business and personal relationships. Cowboy ethics has changed my life, and, I believe, has the potential to change the industry from the inside out. You may feel that the Cowboy's Code does not fit our times. And it is true that few of us will ever be called to test our courage against perils anything like a raging blizzard or a runaway herd of cattle. But we can have the courage to give clients an honest account of bad news, or to confront a business practice that does not put the client first. Every time we make a decision, we can ask ourselves, is it right? Is it fair? We can decide that our honor and our reputations are not for sale. At a time when heroes are in short supply, we can all be heroes in our own lives.